Okay, welcome. As you know, our moderator and organizer of this meetup has traveled to Australia. He just landed, so he's probably watching. If you're there, John, say hi. But I would like to welcome you all here at Center Place, and also welcome all of you who are joining us through live stream on Facebook and YouTube. And because of that, for those of you here, I'm going to ask you that if you have a question or a comment, that you please raise your hand so that we can bring the microphone to you, so that everyone joining us online can also hear your voice, can hear the question and the comment. And those of you who have a comment or a question, please do let us know in the chat box. Today we have a very, very special guest speaker. Dr. Shaheen Baga has been a member of this group, the History, Theology, and Philosophy group for
3.5 years?
3.5 years. So it's been a privilege to have Shaheen because she is the specialist on Islam in the group, and she has already presented a few lectures here, the diverse expressions of Islam, the poetry of Rumi, and 2 lectures on the Quran, which are available to watch on our website, centerplace.ca, and also on our YouTube channel, Centerplace TV. I would like to start, as usual. John usually has the nice slides, but I'm just going to point at the little lights that we have here. Our mission is to invite everyone into community, to continually learn and grow, to abolish poverty and end needless suffering, to pursue peace everywhere, and to live life meaningfully together. And we do that here on Mondays in our mindfulness meditation sessions at 6 and 7 p.m. And also here on Tuesdays with lectures like this one today. Next week, we're going to have another very interesting lecture by a guest speaker. It's going to be Karma, Rebirth, and Free Will. We're going to talk about whether karma is the same as destiny, and whether the doctrine presupposes a deterministic worldview or is predicated by free will. That's going to be March 10. March 17th, we're going to have another guest speaker, Brian Karana, who is going to speak about the imagery of Hinduism. The overwhelming visual iconography sometimes can be a little bit confusing to those of us who did not grow up in the Hindu tradition, so he's going to speak about that. And on March 24th, I myself will be speaking on one of my favorite topics is the religion of Iron Age Israel, and the series of the Divine Feminine. This time we're going to look at the Divine Feminine in ancient Israel, and we're going to explore, we're going to try to reveal the Divine Feminine in the Bible and also in extra biblical sources that talk about the goddesses of pre-monotheistic Israel, like Asherah, Astarte, Anat, and the Queen of Heaven, and many other names which actually appear in the Bible. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Shaheen Baga and to talk about the badass Habibtis tonight. Thank you, Shaheen.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Leandro. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, okay, awesome. So before I get started, I want to thank John for helping me with some amazing graphics and with some amazing maps. And I want to thank also my friend Esther for her help with certain resources when I was looking for information. So one of the reasons that I wanted to give this talk is that there's a lot of focus on the men in a lot of narratives, whether it's the biblical narratives or whether it's Islamic narratives or Christian narratives. There's this huge focus on what the men are doing, and the women get left out of the story. And so I thought to myself, well, why not do a talk on the women that played a pivotal and an essential role in the development of Islam, and introduce people to their history and to their personalities. And so I'd like to title my talk Badass Habibtis. And Habibti is the Arabic word for beloved for women. And so usually in Arabic, like if someone, it's like when, if you go to England and someone says, hey love, would you like this? Or here if it's like, hey dear. So you would call a man, you'd say Habibi, or for a woman you'd say Habibti. And sometimes depending on, how familiar you are with them, that's okay. Sometimes, depending on the country, it's okay to address a stranger that way, just as sort of like a polite way of approaching them. And I thought, what better way to title some of these absolutely amazing women that I'm going to introduce you to. Okay, so, what did I do with the clicker? There we go. All right. So, now, one of the reasons that this is really important is that when people typically think about the role that women play in Islam, an image comes to mind that is very representative of what's up there right now. Is that you have, a whole bunch of men up at the front. Is one of these a pointer, Leandro? Like if I want a laser point. Is it on this one?
We would have to switch.
No, it's fine. I'll indicate. So, you have the men up in front where all the action is happening, and then you have a few of the ladies at the back kind of quietly sitting and listening to what's going on. And it seems like they're not really participating, but just kind of observing, And so this is due to a lot of traditional patriarchal narratives and polemics as well between, Islam and other religions that seek to portray it as a religion where, the men are the actors in the limelight of history and the women are just kind of, in the backdrop. And perfect statement, nothing could be further from the truth. I love these emphatic statements, but it's because it's very true. So now I'm going to introduce you to a number of women, key players, by no means all the women that have played a role in shaping Islam, but some of the most important ones. And so I'm going to start with a timeline that gives you an indication as to when these women were alive and the events that surrounded their lives and their deaths. So we have, on the bottom, you have a timeline from 500 to 900 Common Era. And then you have, at the top, you have Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad. Not that he's a badass Habibti, but just as a reference point for, when he was alive. And then we have, the other women that I'm going to introduce you to, and we have their timelines. And we also have for reference points 622, or the first year of the Hijrah, when the Muslims emigrated to Medina, and which was a turning point for the Muslim religion. The establishment of the Umayyad Caliphate in 661, and also the establishment of the Abbasid Caliphate in 750. And so these are all reference points for these women's lives, and so you can see at what point in time they played a role. Okay. So the first one I'm going to introduce you to is Khadijah al-Kubra, and al-Kubra means the great. And it is a very apt title for this incredible woman who was ahead of her time, even for our times. Because there are things that she did that I think women today might hesitate to do. So she is known by several names, including Amirat al-Quraysh, which is the princess of Quraysh, which was the tribe that controlled Mecca and its trade, as well as al-Tahira, the pure one. And she was Prophet Muhammad's first wife. She had been previously widowed twice. She was an incredibly wealthy woman when she met him. And she used to send several caravans of trade out and then would profit from the trade. And it is said that she had more than 1,000 camels in her caravans. Now, the way she met Prophet Muhammad is that she hired him to lead one of her caravans into the Levant. And he went with a servant of hers named Musera. And when they came back, he had doubled her profits. So she was incredibly impressed. She's like, okay, so he's good looking and he's smart. And she talked to Musera, who said that his character was absolutely impeccable. And based on this, she decided that she was going to propose to him. Now, even today, in our postmodern world, many women wait for the men to propose, and here we have a woman in about 600 AD proposing to a man who is 15 years her junior. And so she sent the proposal, and Prophet Muhammad's response was, I can't pay your dowry, I don't have any money. And her response was, I'll pay it myself. So the dowry is something that was paid usually by the man to the woman's family. So she paid the dowry out of her own pocket to her family so that she could marry him. And so this is just an image showing you the map of the different kingdoms in Arabia and surrounding Arabia, as well as the region in which the trade happened, which is like if you go where you have Najran, you have Mecca, you have going up towards the Levant. And furthermore, Khadijah was the only wife from whom he had children. So they are said to have, according to Sunni and Shia sources disagree, because Shia sources like to have Fatima as their only child and say that the other children were from previous marriages. But most sources say that they had 8 children, of which 4 survived to adulthood. And all 4 of these were women. So now, why is she so amazing? So aside from being such a strong, independent, wise woman, she was also Prophet Muhammad's greatest support. So when he first experienced revelation, or that first verse was revealed to him that said, Iqra, or recite, he was frightened. And he was so frightened that he ran from the cave in which he was meditating. He ran all the way home, straight to Khadijah, straight into her arms and said, cover me up. I do not know what has been happening to me. And she soothed him and she talked to him. And it's her faith in him that gave the religion its impetus. Because without her, he might not have believed in his own message. So she was the first Muslim, and she believed that he had received a divine message even before he believed it. Now, one of the things that she did is that she took Muhammad to her cousin Warqa, who was a Christian, and he was a monk. And based on what he heard from Muhammad, he said, I think that you've been visited by an angel from God, and that it's a message. And this is how Prophet Muhammad came to his idea of prophethood. Initially, he himself thought he was mad. Now, imagine if Khadijah had been some other kind of woman who, when he had come home, had been like, well, you're an idiot for staying in that cave so long. Why don't you just stay put and not do this kind of stuff? We might have been in a very different place today. And she continued to support him. So in the early years in Mecca, and even through a lot of the Medinan years, the Muslims encountered a lot of pushback from the pagans in Mecca, because the message that Prophet Muhammad preached was a direct threat to their prophets and to their pagan trade. And she put everything on the line for Muhammad. Her wealth, her life, her safety. So they were married for 25 years, and for as long as she lived, she was his only wife. And in Islamic tradition, it goes for both Sunni and Shia, she is one of 4 women that are guaranteed paradise. So everybody else, you don't know where they're going for sure. But for these 4 women, including Khadijah, their daughter Fatima, Asiya, who was the sister wife of Pharaoh who took Moses in, and Mary, mother of Jesus. So these are the 4 that have a guaranteed entry into paradise. Now, around the time that Khadijah passed away, the Muslims had been suffering under a 2-year boycott by the Meccans, where no one was allowed to trade with them, no one was allowed to marry into their families, or give them daughters or take their daughters. They were basically cut off, and they had to move outside Mecca. And all her wealth was used up in helping to keep the Muslims clothed and fed and taken care of. And towards the end of the boycott, because it was so harsh, and by this time Khadijah was a woman in her 70s, she fell extremely ill and she passed away. And Prophet Muhammad called this the year of sorrow, because it is also the year in which his uncle Abu Talib, who had been one of his greatest supports, also passed away. And they were so poor by the time she passed away that they didn't even have the money to afford to buy a shroud to bury her in. So they used a cloak that used to be Prophet Muhammad's to bury her. So you see this woman who once started out with more than 1,000 camels in her caravan, and through the hardships that she suffered, finally coming to a point where they didn't even have the money to buy her a shroud to bury her in. And so this is a picture of her tomb in 1806. The tomb has since been destroyed by the Saudis because they have a tendency to do things like this for places that were used in veneration of members of the Prophet's family or of the Prophet. And it has now been turned into public toilets. So that's what sits above her tomb right now. Now, years after Khadijah passed, one of Muhammad's other wives, Aisha, who is one of his favorites, once got really upset at him because he was so fond of Khadijah. She said, "O Prophet of Allah, why is it that of all the old women of Quraysh, you keep mentioning only one, she who died a long time ago? Allah has blessed you with better wives since then," meaning herself, right? "You mention Khadijah as if there is no other woman but her on earth." And so this is Muhammad's response to Aisha. It was, "The truth of the matter is that no one can be better than Khadijah. She believed in me when the whole world refuted me. She attested to my trueness when the whole world accused me of falsehood. She offered me compassion and loyalty when everyone else has forsaken me. O Aisha, what can I do? Love for her runs in my blood and is nestled in my heart." Okay. So that was Khadijah, and now I'm going to talk about their daughter, Fatima al-Zahra. Now, Fatima al-Zahra is got to be the second most important woman next to Khadijah in shaping Islam as it occurred and as it was experienced, because she's revered very highly by Sunnis, and for Shias, she is not only the daughter of Prophet Muhammad and his heir in terms of descent. All of Prophet Muhammad's descendants are through her. She was the only one of his children that survived to have children of her own. So anyone who is descended of Prophet Muhammad is descended of him through her. And for Shias, she is therefore not just his daughter and heir, she is also the conjoining of the two lights of prophecy and of imamate, right? And imamate, or the leadership of the Muslim community for Shias, is tied in completely with descent from Prophet Muhammad. Now, which descendant it is who is the leader who's to be the leader of the community, that depends on which Shia community you come from, but it definitely has to be a descendant of Prophet Muhammad. And this image here in the Middle East and in North Africa, it's a very common image. I know it is very well known in Israel as well, where it's a sign of protection. But in North Africa and in the Muslim countries, it's known as the hand of Fatima. And it is used, the 5 fingers on the hand are used to refer to the Ahl al-Kissa, or the people of the cloak, right? Which goes back to an incident that is referenced in the Quran, where the Prophet was having a discussion with Christians that had come from the south, from Najran, and they were talking about the nature of Christ. And Prophet Muhammad said, well, Christ was like Adam, God just created him. And the priests they were talking to took issue with this and said, well, I don't believe that's true, and I think you're completely wrong. And so at the end of the day, which was a very common practice in Arabia at the time, they came down to settling it by saying, all right, let's call down God's curse on whoever is wrong. And then the verses were revealed. Let us call ourselves, our men and your men, our women and your women, and call down the curse of God, and whoever is wrong will suffer, right? And this verse is known to refer to Prophet Muhammad, Ali, who was his cousin and his son-in-law, Fatima's husband, Fatima and their two sons, Hassan and Hussein, who were essential in all these links in the Shiism imamate, but also considered the Ahl al-Bayt, or the family of the Prophet. Now, she played a really pivotal role, not just as the mother of all the imams, but also in the beginning when Islam was just starting out. So Fatima, the daughter of Khadijah and Muhammad, was quite the spunky woman. And even as a young child, she was quite brave. So there are several stories that talk about how she would stand up to the mistreatment of her father by the pagan Meccans. So there's one incident in which Prophet Muhammad had gone to pray in front of the Kaaba. And this is after prophecy had descended on him. And the pagan Arabs, including some of his own relatives, 4 of them, including one of his uncles, happened to be standing nearby. And so his uncle called for one of his other fellows to bring him the entrails of a sheep that had just been slaughtered. And while Prophet Muhammad was, bowing down in prayer, they took the entrails of the sheep and they threw it on him. And blood is a pollution, so they basically polluted him during his worship. And it was a complete insult. The men that were standing there with him were too afraid to say anything, because in Mecca, Muslims risked their lives by being Muslim. So they dared not stand up to these people. But Fatima, who was under the age of 10 at this point, goes up to her father, takes off the entrails and tries to clean them off as much as possible, goes up to her uncle and these other men and starts yelling at them and saying, God curse you, what are you doing? Do you know who he is? And so this is one of the reasons why she's called Abiha, because her relationship with his father was so dear and they loved each other so much. And after Khadijah's death, she took care of him, to the point where he loved her so much that when he would come home from having gone away somewhere, after offering a short prayer, the first place he would go is to her house. Not to visit any of his wives, he'd go straight to his daughter's house. And when people came to visit him, he would never treat them with the love and dignity with which he treated his daughter. And it is said that when he was asked, because one of the things that people like to say about Muhammad is that he loved the company of women. Now, how people interpret that depends on their own brains. But he has also been said to have said that when he was asked, who is your favorite woman, he said Fatima, so his daughter. Now, there are numerous verses in the Quran that are said to refer to not just her, but her and Ali. And one of the important ones is in Surah 76, that's verses 8 to 11, and this is just the start. It says, and they feed for the love of Allah, the indigent, the orphan, and the captive, saying, we feed you for the sake of Allah alone. No reward do we desire from you, nor thanks. Now, these verses came down when Fatima and Ali had undertaken fasting for a few days, because one of their sons had fallen sick, and so, as sort of a religious penance or whatever it is, they decided to fast. And in the evening, when they wanted to break their fast, a poor person came to their door begging for food. So they gave away their food and they went to bed hungry, right? So they just broke their fast with water. And then the next day they fasted again. And again, another poor person came to their door at the time of breaking the fast and they gave away their food again. So they went to bed hungry a second night. And then the third day, they had their fast, they went to break it, and again, a third poor person came to their door begging for food, and they gave away their food and went to bed hungry a third night. And this is when these verses were revealed. And in this image here, it looks like fire, but that's the sort of like the Islamic equivalent of a halo. It's sort of like a holy kind of fire. And you'll notice that it's Ali and Fatima to his left. yes, yeah, to his left, that are shown in sort of like the holy fire to indicate their holy status. And it's interesting because Ali, who is also considered really holy by the Shias, is not included in that category. It's just Muhammad and his daughter. And you have the same thing here in this image where Muhammad is giving Fatima in marriage to Ali. And you see the two of them again encompassed by a holy fire, whereas Ali is just, looks like a normal dude. So again, just as with her mother and her father, Fatima's marriage was monogamous, and Ali did not take any other wives while she lived. Now, one of the reasons that she's also really important is that after Muhammad's death, she took issue with the succession that happened to Prophet Muhammad. So there is the historical succession, which is his close friends Abu Bakr and then Umar, and then one of his close companions Uthman, and then Ali. And then there is the claim to succession, which is what the Shias follow. And according to them, Ali had the strongest claim. Now, Fatima supported this claim strongly. And it is said that when Abu Bakr was selected to be the new caliph of the Muslim community, the Prophet was still being buried. So his relatives were still dealing with that when all this happened. And nobody asked them, nobody consulted them, nobody wanted their vote. And they took serious issue with this because Ali believed that he strongly had a right to the leadership of the Muslim community. And Fatima fully supported that right. And so after Abu Bakr was elected caliph, she went around literally to people's houses being like, you promised my husband your allegiance. Where is your allegiance? And with some of them, they'd be like, oh, well, it was a moment of distress and chaos, and we just decided it would be best for Abu Bakr. And she also had issues with Abu Bakr because when she went to him, she said that there were lands that had been given to her father and that she should inherit them as his daughter, his only surviving child. And Abu Bakr said, well, I heard your father saying that prophets don't leave anything in inheritance, and so everything goes to charity. So you get nothing. And part of this might have been because of the claim that Ali also had as a relative to succession. And so in order to cut that claim off completely, they cut off Fatima's claim to anything from her father. And as a result of this, she did not speak to Abu Bakr for as long as she lived, which was only 6 months after her father died. And when she was buried at night alone, and none of the caliphs were told. The caliph or any of the other companions were not told. Now, she took strong issue with Abu Bakr when he told her that she had no right to inherit. And she has a beautiful sermon which shows the eloquence of this woman when she tells them, and she's like, do you think that you know better than myself, being the daughter of the Prophet, as to what is right to inherit? It's an absolutely beautiful sermon, and if anyone is interested, I do recommend looking it up. And also as long as she lived, Ali did not offer his allegiance to Abu Bakr. It is only after she passed away that he went to Abu Bakr and said, okay, I accept you as my caliph. And so here we have this central woman figure playing a role in the initial split that leads into the Sunni-Shia distinctions. And one of the things that she is also remembered for is she left her name to something called the Tasbih Fatima. And this is something that was millions of Muslims recite, and I myself have recited innumerable times in difficult times. And it is said that it was revealed to her, it was given to her when she went to Prophet Muhammad, because she did a lot of the housework herself, because she, even though Muhammad is known as a statesman once he's in Medina, he often lived quite simply, and his daughter was made to live very simply. So she needed someone to help with the housework. She went to her father saying, like, can you give me someone to help me? And he said, instead of saying, no, I can't, he said, what if I give you something better? Here's a prayer. And so she went off with the prayer. And this is one of the things that she is remembered for. Okay, so now we've talked about Khadijah and Fatima. Now we'll talk about one of the next most influential women in Islam, and this is Muhammad's wife youngest and most controversial wife, Aisha bint Abu Bakr. So one of the reasons, she's controversial for several reasons. One of them is that because she was his youngest wife, and their marriage was initially contracted when she hadn't yet hit puberty. There's a lot of focus in polemics, especially when people are trying to target practices in early Islam and criticisms of Prophet Muhammad. They say, well, she was, like, the estimates are she was anywhere between 6 to 10 when the marriage was first contracted, and 9 to 14 when it was consummated. And so there's a huge age range, because with any of these ages, if we go back, any of these ages, they're all estimates. There's no hard numbers. And so for this reason, this is one of the reasons that she is a controversial wife, and especially outside of Islam, that's the main reason. Now, within Islam, there are several reasons why she is the most controversial wife, and we will cover those in the next couple of slides. Now, she is also the daughter of Abu Bakr, who was the first caliph and one of Muhammad's closest friends. Now, Aisha is a really interesting case. She is incredibly spunky, outspoken, sassy, and regardless of whether you're Sunni or Shia, you have to agree that she kept Muhammad on his toes. Whether it was just sassing him back, or whether it was literally arranging like rebellions with the other wives of his household, to the point where he got so fed up and he's like, I'm not sleeping with any of you, I'm just going to go away somewhere. So this is an image here that it's really hard to find images of these women. And this is one that shows Aisha kneeling over here before Prophet Muhammad. And it is in something known as the incident of the necklace. And this ties into verses in the Quran that were revealed about adultery. So what happened is that they were at an encampment and they were getting ready to leave. And then Aisha realized that she had lost a favorite necklace of hers. So she started looking for it, and she was supposed to be in her hawda, which is like a sort of like an enclosure that sits on the back of a camel. And they didn't realize she was gone because she was kind of light and small. And so she's off looking for her necklace, and her camel takes off, and she gets left behind. And luckily for her, there was one of the men in the camp had sort of like lagged behind, and he ended up spotting her, and he knew her from before. So he took her on his camel to where the Muslims had made their next encampment. And when they walked into camp, it was a huge fuss, where people started being like, well, why is she just showing up late with this guy? What's happening? Is she having an affair? And so people, started to say stuff like that. And this is when the verses regarding adultery were revealed, which require 4 witnesses to the act before a woman can be blamed for adultery. And this incident is also really important because it basically turned Aisha against Ali. And this played a big role in the Shia-Sunni split, especially in the events that happened in Islamic history. Because before the verses were revealed, Prophet Muhammad didn't know what to do. So he asked his closest friends, and one of the people that he asked was Ali. And Ali's advice was, well, you can always divorce her. And she never forgave him for that. Never forgave him for that. And so that we will come to in a minute when we get to the Battle of Jamal and I tell you about the first fitna. Now, Aisha is really important because in Sunni sources, it is estimated that she narrated more than 2,000 hadith, or reports about Prophet Muhammad's life. And even when other companions would narrate these hadith, sometimes they wouldn't necessarily understand what was happening. And it's known that when there was trouble in understanding, they would go back to Aisha, and Aisha would clarify the result for them. And it is said that in Sunni Islam, 2/3 of the religion has come from Aisha. So very, very important in this aspect. Now, when you get to the Battle of Jamal, which is the first situation when Muslims were actively fighting Muslims, other Muslims, Aisha played a pivotal role. So what happened is that after the death of the third caliph, he was murdered. And he was murdered by a band of Muslims who were very unhappy with the way he was running the Muslim community. And after his death, Ali became the next caliph. Now, during Uthman's life, Aisha had been one of the most vocal people against some of the practices that were happening, primarily nepotism and the misuse of public funds. So basically, what was collected from the zakat from the Muslims and other taxes, and how these funds were being misspent and misused by Uthman's relatives, whom he had all appointed to high offices. Right? So she was one of the most vocal opponents. But after Uthman's death, once Ali came in, she immediately started demanding that the murderers be brought to justice, without any regard as to what this justice was supposed to look like. She's like, we want them to be held responsible, meaning, you know. And in a sense, like, Aisha was not in a place to make such a demand, because the law of retribution, Quranically, or the demand, which is qisas, is something that only family members can demand. So if somebody kills a family member or injures a family member of yours, you have a right to demand that that person be injured likewise or pay an equivalent amount. But Aisha was not related to Uthman in any way. So there are purely political motives for this, and she did not want Ali taking over the leadership of the Muslim community. And so this ended up leading to the Battle of Jamal, in which 13,000 warriors, led by Aisha, in her hawda on her camel, right, attacked Ali's forces. And the fighting was centered around her hawda. And that's when Ali noticed and realized that if he wanted to win, he had to take her and her camel, which is exactly what he did. And so he won the Battle of Jamal. And after this, she kind of sort of like, you know, slipped back into a more quiet, primarily teaching-focused role. Okay, so that's sassy lady number 3. Now we're going to look at another one of Prophet Muhammad's wives, who is Salama. And she lived a very, very long time. I mean, it's roughly 100 years. You know, so she saw everything from, you know, the rise of Islam to the death of Hussein, you know. Now she's also known as Hind bint Abu Umayyah, which means Hind, the daughter of Umayyah's father. Because in Arabic, there's this interesting nomenclature, which is like, once you have a child, you are called father or mother of your eldest child. So she clearly wasn't the eldest child. And she's also one of the earliest converts to Islam, and was one of the about 15 to 20 people who emigrated to Ethiopia in about 613 or 614, when the persecution of Muslims in Mecca had reached its height, and people who were not in a powerful position or who were poor and weak literally had to escape for their lives. And so she had emigrated there. And after a while, once the persecution eased, then the Muslims came back. Now, once her husband died, she received several marriage proposals, including one from Prophet Muhammad. So he married her around the same time that he officially married Aisha. And she was about 45 years old at the time. And so when he proposed to her, she said, I have a number of reservations. And he said, okay, what are your reservations? And she's like, well, I'm impatient and I have a sharp tongue. Okay. I have, you know, I'm old now, and I have lots of children. To which his response was, I'll pray for you to be patient. I'm also old, and I would like to provide for your children. So she's really important because in Islam, when we look at the Quran, there are occasions of revelation, which are called asbab an-nuzul. So this is basically an incident happens, and then the Muslim community learns how to deal with it through verses that are revealed to the Prophet that literally tell him this is what you should do. This is how you should deal with it. And so with Salama, one of the things that happened was that, you know, as an early Muslim, at one point, she said to Prophet Muhammad, she's like, what about the women? Why are women not mentioned as much as men are in the Quran? And then after she said this, a verse was revealed, which is Quran 33:35. And I'm going to pull up that verse for you right now. And the verse reads, for Muslim men and women, for believing men and women, for devout men and women, for true men and women, for men and women who are patient and constant, for men and women who are humble, who humble themselves, for men and women who give in charity, for men and women who fast, for men and women who guard their chastity, and for men and women who engage much in Allah's praise. For them Allah has prepared forgiveness and a great reward. And after this, there were a lot more overt mentions of women. And so we have to thank Salama for that. Now, another really important role that she played was in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was negotiated between the Meccans and the Muslims from Medina in 628 CE. And it is the first time since the Muslims fled from from Mecca, that they were recognized as people whose lives were sacred. So prior to this, any Muslim was a persona non grata in Mecca. And it is only after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and its signing that Muslims were allowed to be in Mecca and their lives were safe, and so was their property. And she was present at this treaty and advised Prophet Muhammad. And also after Aisha, she is known to have transmitted the most hadith about Prophet Muhammad's life. And she also played an important role in that first fitna when Aisha and Ali were on opposite sides and Salama sided with Ali. Now, where did I put that clicker? Ah, found it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that's Salama. And now we come to Zeinab bint Ali. So this is the granddaughter of Prophet Muhammad. This is also another very sassy, strong, independent woman. So she is known by several names, including al-Fasiha and al-Baligha, which are the eloquent. She was one of Fatima and Ali's two daughters. They had 4 children in total. And she used to teach the women of Medina the interpretation of the Quran and about the life of her grandfather, Muhammad. Now, she plays a really important role after Muhammad's death at something called the Battle of Karbala. So just to give you a quick backdrop, the Battle of Karbala occurred because after Ali was assassinated during his caliphate, his elder son Hassan took over, and then Hassan was coerced into abdicating by a fellow named Muawiyah. And then Muawiyah, once he became the caliph, wanted to retain that and turn it into a dynastic thing. And so he wanted his son to succeed him. His son's name was Yazid. And so when he was dying and he wanted Yazid to take power, he told Yazid that it was essential that he obtained the allegiance of key members of the Muslim community, because by doing that, the rest of them would accept him as their caliph. And one of those people was Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Hussein. And so when Yazid claimed the caliphate, he demanded allegiance of Hussein. Hussein didn't like Yazid. He didn't want him to be the caliph. He didn't think he would be fit. So he refused allegiance. And he started heading towards Kufa in Iraq, where there were other people who did not support Yazid's claim. Now, when Yazid found this out, he sent a contingent of 300 soldiers to stop Hussein. And he said, stop him at any cost and get his allegiance. Don't let him get to Kufa. And so what ended up happening is that the army, this contingent of soldiers, stopped him at a place called Karbala. And they tried to force Hussein to give his allegiance. Hussein absolutely refused. As a result, him, the males in his household save one, and all his companions were killed. And that includes his 6-month-old son. And in Tabari's history of the Muslim world, he narrates the traditions that show how they had cut off Hussein's camp from water. And after about 3 days, they'd run out of water. So Hussein went to beg from them and said, let me get access to the river so I can give my family water. And they refused. And so in order to try and turn their hearts, he brought his 6-month-old son, Ali-Asghar, and he said, look, my son is thirsty. And someone in the army fired an arrow into the child's throat. And Hussein took his 6-month-old dying baby and put him back in his mother's arms, saying, here, this is all I have to give you. And this is narrated by a Sunni historian. And Karbala is one of the most painful moments in Islamic history. And clearly, I'm upset about it. I guess it's a sign of my Shia faith. We'll just call it that. Anyway, so after the battle, after Hussein had been killed, the men were, including Hussein, were decapitated. Their heads were put on spears. Their bodies were trampled under the horses' hooves. And the tents of the women were set on fire to get them to come out. And Zeinab was essential in trying to calm down the children and the women, gathering them all together and trying to make sure they were minimally hurt. And so all together, they were put in chains and they were marched to Damascus, which is where Yazid was. So at Yazid's court, each of the heads was brought up to Yazid and identified. It was told, this is so-and-so, the companion of Hussein, and this is so-and-so, the companion of Hussein. And then finally, Hussein's head was brought up. And Yazid had a stick with which he hit the mouth of Hussein and said, if my ancestors who had fought against Prophet Muhammad in the early days and who had died in the Battle of Badr, if they had been here, they would have seen me take revenge for Badr. And at this point, Zeinab is said to have spoken out because she was absolutely protesting the way he was treating, the way these heads were being paraded. And so when she started protesting, Yazid said, who is this arrogant woman? And she rose up and said, why are you asking them? Ask me, I will tell you. I am the granddaughter of Muhammad. I am the daughter of Fatima. And this is her shrine in Damascus. And this is her sermon to Yazid. And it gives you an indication just as to how courageous, how outspoken this woman was. Said, what you consider today as spoils of war will become ruins for you tomorrow. And on that day you will find that what you have sent from before. Allah does not oppress his servants. I express my complaint only to Allah and have trust in him. You may therefore do any treachery that you can, make all your attempts. By Allah, you cannot remove us from the minds of people, and you cannot hide our message. You will never reach our glory and can never wash the stain of this crime from your hand. Your decisions will be unstable, your period of rule short, and your people will scatter. And her sermon turned out to be quite prophetic because Yazid's rule lasted only 3 years, during which there were several uprisings because people were so upset about what happened at Karbala. The Prophet's family was considered sacred. And for him to have had Hussein killed in that manner was just absolutely devastating and horrifying for the Muslim community. And so his rule lasted only 3 years, after which he died. His son, who was supposed to succeed him, died under mysterious circumstances. And he was finally succeeded to by Marwan, who was basically his uncle, and a very important figure in basically causing a lot of the troubles that happened in the early Muslim community. And that's how the Umayyad Caliphate became established. Okay, so we've covered Zeinab. Now I'm going to look at one of the most important women in Sufism. and this is Rabia al-Adawiya. Now, she lived around 717 to 1801. So she saw, the Umayyad, the great Arab conquests that pushed out into the Byzantine and into Spain, and lived long enough to see the Umayyads being overthrown and replaced by the Abbasids. Now, Rabia al-Adawiya is one of the key figures in early Sufism. And in Fariduddin Attar's Memoirs of the Saints, when he talks about her, he says that, how can I not have included her? She is superior to anyone else around her. And what the important things that she introduced are the idea of a selfless love of God as opposed to a desire for heaven or a fear of hell. Now, Rabia was very poor. She was born into a poor family, and when she was young, she was orphaned. Both her parents died, and having no one to protect her, one day she was out in the streets, a man came and grabbed her and sold her into slavery. And she remained a slave until one day her owner saw her praying in a room with a candle that seemed to be suspended in thin air. And he was so freaked out by that that he was like, okay, I'm just going to set you free so you can do what you like. And Rabia is so important because, she shows that the role that early Muslim women played wasn't just this, sit behind a screen or cover yourself and hide sort of thing, and not just as someone who might have been attached to the Prophet himself, but as someone who came afterwards, who didn't have power or rank. And yet this woman's work speaks volumes throughout Islam today. And so she was highly revered in Basra, where she was from. And there were other Sufi men around her, one important one being Hassan al-Basri. And he is known mainly for his focus on sort of like, crying all the time to sort of atone for anything you might do so that God doesn't send you to hell. And Rabia is known to have chastised him for this sort of behavior. So one day she was walking in town, and coming from his house, there was this like stream of water. And she looked carefully and then traced it to it being his tears. He was crying so much that it was literally this tiny little river that was coming out from his house. And Rabia was like, Hassan, why are you crying so much? And Hassan was like, I'm so scared I'm going to go to hell. I'm so scared I'm going to go to hell. And Rabia scolded him. She said, you are so obsessed with what is happening to you that the only thing you're caring about right now is yourself, when you should be focused on God. So she told him. And so, Hassan sort of took that into consideration, but his ego was a little wounded. So the next time he saw her, they were by the banks of a river. And Hassan was like, Rabia. Okay, he was like, let me put her to the test. And he throws his prayer rug onto the river, onto the water, and he's like, come, let's pray on the water. Because there used to be this thing where Sufis, saints would compete with each other in order to establish their nearness to God or God's favor. So he throws his prayer mat on the water. He's like, come, let's pray on the water. And so Rabia looks at him and she's like, okay, you want to display the goods of the next world in the market of this world. Fine. So she takes her prayer rug and she throws it up into the air. And she goes, come, let's pray up there where I can hide you from everyone else. And he looks kind of like pissed off. And she's like, look, what you asked me to do, any fish can do. And what I asked you to do, any fly can do. The real business is beyond both. So you have this amazingly, wise woman. And one of the things that she is extremely well known for saying is, I wish to throw fire into paradise and water into hell so that we may know who truly worships God out of love. And this comes from a time when she's literally seen walking around Basra with a pitcher of water in one hand and a flaming torch in the other. And people were like, Rabia, what are you doing? And she said, this torch is for heaven and this pitcher is for hell. And she's also said, love, which is muhabbat in Arabic, has come from pre-eternity and passed into post-eternity and perceived no one amongst 18 worlds competent to drink even a gulp of its sherbet, which is like a cooling sweet drink. When at last love reached the truth, only this adage remained: he loves them and they love him. And this is a reference to a verse in the Quran, which is from Surah 5, verse 54, where it says, God loves them and they love him. And it is a verse that Sufis have pondered over and over again, because for them it's an example of how God's love always precedes the love of humans. Now, stories about her life illustrate a countercultural understanding of gender roles and the role of women, and especially illustrate the more egalitarian approach that Sufism has towards women. So she had male disciples. One of them, Sufyan al-Thawri, was a known scholar, a hadith collector and transmitter, and even did his own translation and interpretation of the Quran. She received, men in her home. People would come to see her from everywhere. And she was also so highly regarded, even by Hassan al-Basri, that he would not have a meeting unless she was present, because he felt that no one would be able to understand or be inspired as much as she was. And he also says, I passed one whole night and day with Rabia. It never passed through my mind that I was a man, nor did it occur to her that she was a woman. When I looked at her, I saw myself as bankrupt, spiritually worth nothing, and Rabia as truly sincere. This is a quote from Hassan al-Basri, because Sufism focuses on the unity of God, and in the unity of God there is no separate existence, therefore there are no distinctions between man and woman. So that is Rabia al-Basri. Now there's still a couple more women. So the women I have shown so far have primarily worked through scholarly means, except for Aisha, who participated in the battle. Now the next women that I'm going to look at, the next two, are a little more action-oriented. Okay. So first we have Nusayba bint Ka'b, and she was also one of Islam's earliest converts. And she is known for her bravery on the battlefield. So the Battle of Uhud, which is the second battle that the Muslims fought, and the first one that they lost, Nusayba played a key role in defending Prophet Muhammad. And she is said to have taken 12 wounds defending him before she passed out, and then people had to come in and take her away. Okay, so that's Nusayba. So we don't exactly know when she was born, but she died around 634. And then we have Khalwa bint al-Azwar. Now, Khalwa was the daughter of a family of early converts, and she is first recorded as fighting in the siege of Damascus in 634, when her brother was taken prisoner by the Byzantines. And so in response to her brother being taken, she ran into their tent, grabbed whatever armor she could, jumped on a horse, and went out to save her brother. And she is said to have fought with such ferocity that the men who were fighting thought that she was their captain. They were like, oh, look, it's Khalid ibn Walid. He's come to save this guy. And then later out, it turns out it was her. So this is a stamp commemorating her from Jordan. And when Khalid discovered that she was a woman, he was so impressed by her bravery. He's like, no, you're going to keep fighting. I know you're a woman, but that's fine. And Khalwa was by no means alone in this. She continued to participate in battles against the Byzantines, including one where they captured her, made fun of her for being a woman, and then she organizes all the prisoners, gets them to break free, and then takes off, and then turns back and then beats these guys. So, it's just to show never underestimate a woman. Now, Khalwa was far from, unique in this. there are several records of the conquest of Syria from the early 9th century that show that the Qurayshi women or the Arab women played a very active role in the battles. And one of the reports has Asma bint Abu Bakr, so Aisha's sister, tying her horse's reins to her husband's horse, and every time he struck at someone, she made sure she matched him blow for blow. You know, and other Qurayshi women participated in the fighting to the point where whenever the men felt like they wanted to turn and run, the women would press on and say, I am not going to be taken as a slave. If you want to run, you're the coward. I'm standing my ground as a woman. So then the men would be like, well, we can't just let them stand ground and us run. So they continued to fight. And hence, the conquest of Syria was actually won by the women. And it's possible that, you know, these stories of these amazing women, and especially Khalwa, inspired a number of epics, popular Arabic epics, that were written about warrior heroines. And there's one main one called Dalhama, which focuses on this warrior heroine called Fatima Dalhama. And you know, she's this incredible woman who is raised as a boy because her father wanted a son but couldn't have a son, and so to save face pretended his daughter was a boy and trained her in all the, you know, martial arts, and nobody could best her. Now the really interesting thing about you know, Dalhama is that Fatima is far from the only warrior woman being referenced. There are at least 16 other women, both on the sides of the Muslims and also included on the Byzantine sides, who fight and who are warrior women. And their narrative follows the traditional narrative of a hero epic, you know, where you have this incredibly good-looking hero who cannot be defeated in battle, you know, who goes out and lays waste to his enemies and then, you know, ends up winning, you know, a partner. And in this case, sometimes it's done, you know, with the same sort of formula where the men will seduce these warrior women. You know, there's this one occasion where Fatima is actually, she can't be beaten in battle. And so the man who's trying to defeat her literally starts throwing his hair around to show her how beautiful it is. And it's such a role reversal, you know, it's wonderful. And, you know, one of the other women that are mentioned in this, who's one of my favorites, is a woman named Ghamra. And there's another epic as well that has another Ghamra. But this Ghamra is pretty cool because she's also raised as a boy and ends up seeing a man who she falls in love with. Tells her mother that she's fallen in love, and the mother's like, okay, well, we'll try to get him to come over, and then once he sees you're a woman, he sees how beautiful you are, and, you know, knows how talented you are, he'll want you. You know, why would he say no, right? And so, you know, this fellow's invited over, you know, through various subterfuges, and then eventually declares his disinterest in a very insulting way. And poor Ghamra, you know, is heartbroken. And you'd think, you know, according to the traditional, oh, you know, woman in love, she should pine away and waste away, and then maybe he'll take pity on her and come back, or, you know, she'll risk her life for him in some way, and he'll realize how important she is, and he'll regret his earlier behavior. This is very common in Bollywood, by the way. You know, and he'll come to his senses. But that doesn't happen. Ghamra pouts for about 3 months, and then decides she's had enough of pouting and tells her mother, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to find some adventure, you know. And she isn't told by her mother to sort of, you know, stay put and be a good girl. Her mother's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, go do this thing that you want to do, you know. And so Ghamra goes out and she decides she wants to teach this fellow a lesson. So she finds out where he is, tracks him down and finds him in a forest, but she's dressed as a man again, so he doesn't recognize her. And she confronts him and starts hurling insults at him. And he's like, do you know who I am? Because he gets so upset. She's like, yeah, you're son of so-and-so, you piece of you know. And so she's like, you know what? I am supposed to marry this girl, and I have to pay a heavy bride price, and I'm going to pay it using your stuff. So he's like, oh yeah? Fight me for it. And she's like, I will. And so they fight, and as they're fighting, she keeps taking stuff off him. So first she takes his helmet, then she takes his shield. Finally, she's got him down to his trousers, okay? And he starts begging her. He says, please, please don't take my trousers. I'm going to be naked, and I've got nothing to be decent with. And she's like, no, I can sell those. So she takes his trousers, his horse, and everything, and leaves him butt naked in the forest. And so this guy is left to sort of like, and the epic literally describes him as, you know, putting one hand in front and one hand at the back and kind of like sneaking out of the forest and sneaking back to camp. And when he gets back to camp, he goes to his tent, his family tent, and finds that all his stuff has been deposited there. And so he asks, and he says, where did this come from? And he's told, that warrior that defeated you was the woman you did not show any interest in. You know, you didn't want to hang around women, and that was your excuse. And so he immediately falls in love with her and decides he wants to marry her, sends his father to her father, and her dad is like, okay, maybe he's come around. So the father goes to her, and he's like, hey, this guy you wanted to marry wants to marry you. And she's like, I will not marry him. And I was like, why? He's like, well, he's useless, you know? And the dad's like, but you wanted to. And she's like, look, if you try to force me to marry him, I will convert to Christianity and I'll go fight for the Byzantines. At which point her father's like, okay, no, it's fine. You don't have to, I'm not going to push you. It's fine. You do whatever you want, you know? And then, so through various other subterfuges, this guy sort of like takes on the role of the stereotypical femme fatale, you know, and connives a way to get the caliph to get them both married. And once the caliph says something, you have to do it. So the caliph is like, no, these two should get married. So she is put into her bridal wear by force and then left alone with him in a tent, at which point she decides she's going to tie him up, and ride off. So she just leaves him there. And so it's like these stories, which, you know, originated around the 8th century, you know, but are known in their earliest composed forms by about the 12th century, is they show this very different understanding of what women were like, you know, and what was expected of them, and what could be celebrated about a woman. And so there's two other epics, and this is, sorry, let's jumped ahead. So there are two other epics included in this book, which I would recommend as reading for anyone who's interested in the topic. One which is called Sira Antara, that traces slightly pre-Islamic into Islamic period, and it's focused around a male warrior, but has prominent female warriors too. And one of them, her name is also Ghamra, but she is Ghamra bint Faiz, and she's a black heroine. So her mother is Ethiopian, and when she is born, her father rejects her because she is dark-skinned, but then later on accepts her because she's such a celebrated warrior. And then finally, we have a third one, which is the Sira Baybars, which is about this Mamluk Baybars who ruled Egypt and Syria from 1260 to 1277. And the warrior women that feature in this are really interesting because they're the female assassins, or the female fidawis. And one of them, I think her name is also Fatima. We see a part of her story where, you know, she is on a mission, and she ends up disguising herself as a man, goes into this inn and sort of like wants to stay there. And when the innkeeper tries to take advantage of her, she just kills him. So again, never underestimate a woman. Okay. So those are my 2 warrior women for the day. And then we have our final influential woman, who is Fatima al-Fihri. Now, hers was a more sort of like traditional scholastic approach, where she's the daughter of a rich merchant, and she took the inheritance that she received from her father to build a mosque and also to build al-Qarawiyyin University. Now, this is the world's oldest continuously existing university and is one of the first that started awarding degrees. Now, this university, which you can see the courtyard here, is also really important because it boasts some of the oldest collections of hadith. You know, and hadith is one of the ways in which one of the things that people use to interpret the Quran and, you know, sort of like how to live life as a good Muslim. So the university that she started has some of the oldest collections. Okay. And with that, I would like to thank you for my amblings and for coming to this talk. And I hope that you got to learn something interesting about these amazing women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shaheen, and yeah, there you go. Thank you, Shaheen, for an excellent presentation, and I encourage everyone here at Toronto Center Place to ask questions, and also we would like to hear your comments. I would like to start with a question coming from Roylene, participating from Redmond, Washington. She's just a clarification. Was the Sunni Shiite split related to the conflict between Aisha and Fatima, and that is stepmother, stepdaughter, and how did Fatima die after only 6 months?
So the Sunni Shia split, I wouldn't say is directly related to the conflict between Aisha and Fatima, which I think has been emphasized in some reports a lot more than it should be. And the way that Fatima died is that, according to Shia sources, she was injured when, so after Abu Bakr received the oath of allegiance from a large number of the Muslims, it was taken by force from a lot of the other Muslims. And one of the events that is reported more in Shia sources, of course, is that they went to the family of the Prophet, they went to Fatima's house and Ali's house, and they wanted their allegiance, and they refused to open the door, and so they tried to break down the door. And when that happened, it is said that Umar injured Fatima when he was breaking down the door, that she got injured. Now, according to Shia sources, that caused her to miscarry her son Musa. But this tradition about the miscarriage of Musa is a later one, and the earlier sources just say that he passed away at a young age, and they don't say that he was miscarried.
No, I'd like to. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you for your wonderful talk, Shaheen, and it's just very striking to me as I'm hearing this of how generative women were in Islamic history, right? Like the role that Fatima played and still plays today in like Shiism and and how Shia leadership is established, and also Aisha for Sunnis, because for Sunnis, here you go. For Sunnis, Aisha is seen as like this figure who's a generator of hadith and a generator of Sunni orthodoxy. And I even read a book which was very interesting that suggests a lot of the narrations that emphasize her youth and her virginity and so on is to kind of, it's almost sort of like hagiography. Like it's kind of like really, yes, like she was, she was so young and she had such insights that other wives can have. And it's interesting you bring up the Mamluks, because the Mamluks was also started by a woman. Her name was Shajara or something like that. But it's just, to me, it's so striking. And even Rabia, how she was so influential with Sufi and mystic traditions and the way that developed. And I find it so striking that it seems in the inception, women played such a big role in such huge historic roles. And I'm just wondering, like, how do we bring back those histories? Because I feel like when I read the male scholarship, right, I'm seeing a lot of these women who are quoted, but just kind of slowly kind of pushed in the background a little bit, right? Like Salama who is my personal favorite of the badass Habibtis, I must say. She's quoted as being like a theologian and a Quranic interpreter, but then it's kind of left there, right? And I'm just curious, like, what are some ways we can bring these women's stories back? Because I feel like there are women just all over Islamic history, but they're given like such, you have to really search for their names, right? And I'm just like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how can we bring these women back to give them the attention that I think they deserve?
Yeah, I mean, that's, thank you so much for that comment, Esther. And you're absolutely right. Like it's women's voices that get shouted over. And this happens not just, in Islam or in other religions. This happens in everything. So even if you look at science and the contribution that women have made to science over the centuries, the contributions of women are always downplayed. So for example, with DNA, everyone's like, oh, Watson and Crick. But what about Rosalind Franklin, who actually discovered what the DNA structure looks like? You know, like how many people know her name? You know, like astronomers, physicists, geographers. It's this constant pushback that women are constantly dealing with. And I think the problem lies in the fact that every time we win, we think that's it, it's the last battle. But it's not. You know, and if you just look at the US and you look at what's happened to women's reproductive rights there, it's once you've won a battle, it's not just one. You have to keep fighting. And I think that's something that a lot of young women don't realize, you know, and that they forget. And I think that that's one of the reasons why these women's stories have been lost to history, is that because it's taken for granted that, you know, oh, they did something, and then another generation comes through, and, you know, it comes through with a patriarchal focus, with a patriarchal push, and those voices get lost, you know. So I think it's up to us, you know, as women and, you know, men who are interested in this, is to, you know, remember these women and to talk about them and to bring them into people's minds and say, hey, maybe you should go learn about this, you know. But also just not to forget that this is an ongoing battle. Like, whatever rights we win, they can and they are being taken away in different places. Like, if you look at Afghanistan today, the United States has negotiated, you know, treaty with the Taliban, so they're pretty much back where they were, you know, pre 9/11, which for any woman there is like, oh shit, you know. And I'm saying this as a Muslim woman who loves her faith, but who is so thankful that I don't have to live under that kind of oppression, you know, which is like, it's extra horrible because it's propagated in the name of my religion. So sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
Is there any U.S. Democratic candidate that is more likely to allow voice?
For Muslim women? See, that's a tough one, because there tends to be this issue that's very prominent when you look at Western feminism and you look at either black feminism or feminism in other parts of the world, is there's a sort of a we're better off than you are attitude, you know. So even in something as simple as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is the last place where you'd think they'd talk about, you know, the treatment of Muslim women. Apparently there's this little diatribe in there about, you know, how Muslim women are so worse off than their European sisters. And I mean, Mary Shelley was the daughter of, you know, one of the earliest feminists, Mary Wollstonecraft. But it's so ironic that this would come in, because at the time, Muslim women had more rights than their European sisters. And so this sort of lens, you know, that non-Western, non-European descent women are sort of seen through. There's sort of a pitying lens that I think has to be removed before like, anything real can be addressed. I hope I answered your question. Sort of, no, really, no. Okay. Well, I mean, to be honest, like I really like. I think that the women candidates that are there in the U.S. right now, that they're strong. I don't know if they're likely to win, but again, I don't have much hope for their sort of like giving voice to Muslim women necessarily. Like, I don't even know if that's something they care about. You know.
You're gonna remind everyone that it's Super Tuesday.
Oh yeah.
Everyone's gonna run out of here.
Any other questions? No, we're good.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Can I have the microphone? Thank you, Shaheen, once again.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for participating from here and on Facebook and YouTube. And remember that next week we're going to have a lecture, our third lecture on the topic of free will, karma, rebirth, and free will. Is karma the same as destiny? Is this doctrine supposing a deterministic worldview, or is it predicated on free will? So next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Here. And those of you here, please are very welcome to stay. We have snacks and beverages, so please do stay, and let's continue to talk about the topic. Okay, thank you.